The day of Singapore's independence, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew wept. This lawyer was born, graduated from Cambridge, the man who ruled the country with an iron fist for a lifetime. I only cried twice in my life, once when my mother died, another time is this day, he cried at the press conference. The entire press conference was interrupted for 20 minutes. Why is that? Because he didn't fight for this country. It was kicked out. The Malaysian parliament took a few hours. 3 poisons passed the Singapore Separation Act. They kicked Singapore out 4:30 p.m. that day. Procedures completed. It's 214 square miles across. It's only so big when the tide goes out. It is smaller than 1/9 of Shanghai. Just like that, he was kicked out by his father. Fend for itself. Lee Kuan Yew later wrote in his memoirs, some countries are already independent, some countries achieved independence. Independence of Singapore was imposed on the head August 9, 1965. Not a day to celebrate for Singapore, but today in 2024 the island that was kicked out, GDP per capita $85,000 beyond the United States, surpassed Japan, first in Asia, and it gets worse. Water scarcity in Singapore. In order not to get stuck, raise the most capable army in Southeast Asia. It's clearly written in the army plan. As long as Malaysia turns off the faucet, Singapore fighter jets take off soon. How'd he do it? Welcome back to the world, reorganizing the life and death of 80 nations, reading 80 years after World War II. I am the leader Yang Gua. Today we talk about the first hand of cards in Singapore. How bad is it? To understand how miserable Singapore is, you have to see the cards in his hand first. The land area is less than 700 square kilometers. Population 2 million. This 2 million, 75% are Chinese, 20% are Malays, the rest is Indians and otherism. It's a language barrier. Religion is different, culturally diverse, immigrant platter. What's worse is geography. To the north of Singapore are horses, to the south of Malaysia is Indonesia, a Muslim majority country, 100 million population. Lee Kuan Yew himself said a word: Singapore. It's a Chinese island in the Malay Sea. Look again at resources. Food needs to be imported, vegetables should be imported, meat to be imported, even drinking water has to be bought from Johor, Malaysia. A pipe was connected from under the Strait of Johor. Every sip of water that Singaporeans drink, the lifeblood, is in the hands of others. But the industrial base is not in front of Singapore Station. It was an entrepot for the British colonies. The main business is to fight for the British. 1968 the British announced their intention to withdraw from the east of the Suez Canal. 300,000 jobs in Singapore. The jobs on the British military base are about to be destroyed. What was the GDP per capita of Singapore at that time? What is the unemployment rate of $450? How does 12% of international public opinion view Singapore? The New York Times, the London Times unanimously fight aging. One Western critic put it bluntly: Singapore is a barely formed country, no future after independence. The irony is next door to Indonesia. At that time, Indonesian President Sukarno was engaged in Smash Malaysia campaign. The entire Southeast Asia geopolitical landscape for Singapore like a pot of boiling water. It's that leaf on the water. Lee Kuan Yew said something. I think this sentence is better than 10,000 sentences. Analysis have power. I never imagined that at the age of 42 to assume responsibility for the independent management of Singapore, taking care of 2 million boundless future, but I don't know where to go. A 42-year-old man accept a country that can't even drink water. The opponent is a Muslim. See this situation, I would cry too. Chapter 2: Turning weakness into a lifeblood and crying back. There's still work to be done. Lee Kuan Yew holds a cabinet meeting behind closed doors. Made a very strange national policy. Singapore has no hinterland, so the hinterland of Singapore is the world. How do you understand this? In 1965, what is popular in newly independent developing countries? Popular import substitution, that is, start your own industry behind closed doors. Draw a line with foreign investment using multinational companies as vampires. India is going this way. Brazil is going this way. Later, a bunch of countries in Latin America. It's all this way. Lee Kuan Yew and his finance minister, Wu Qingruei, this guy. He later became known as the chief architect of Singapore's economy, made a decision in the opposite direction: do not engage in import substitution. Export-oriented. In 1965, Singapore abolished all import tariffs. A newly independent country. Open up all your markets to the outside world. The country is so small, tariffs are all money. Why would you do that? Lee Kuan Yew's logic is particularly clear. What are Singapore's weaknesses? No resources, no market, no hinterland. These three things will not change in another 100 years. Since you can't change it, then don't compete on these three. What are the advantages of Singapore? Geographical location. Stuck in the throat of the Strait of Malacca, there is a group of Chinese who can speak English, then make a fuss about the advantages, so Singapore did the first thing. Establishment of the Economic Development Bureau. This organization has only one KPI: bring multinational companies to Singapore to set up factories. Lee Kuan Yew and Wu Qingruei became salespeople. Get on a plane in person and fly around the world knocking on the doors of multinational company CEOs. At that time, most countries in the world meet executives of multinational companies. Attitude is scrutiny, it's vigilance, it's bargaining. Lee Kuan Yew's attitude is, you come, I promise to give you everything for free. Tax deduction for you workers, I will help you train. Approval. I'll finish the strike for you in 2 weeks, I promise not. Singapore's trade unions are being attacked by the people, the party firmly controls law and order, I promise. Okay. The crime rate is one of the lowest in Asia. In 1968, National Semiconductor Corporation decided to Singapore factory. The Economic Development Bureau has made a CEOs of multinational companies' eyes wide open from site selection to commissioning. 2 weeks is not 2 months. It's 2 weeks. The efficiency spreads. It's like doing a global advertisement for free. HP is here, here comes General Electric, here comes Philips. 1965 to 1973 Singapore's economy grew at an average annual rate of 12.1%. Double digits every year for 8 years. Singapore, the island where my father kicked me out, worked for 8 years. Put yourself in a middle-income country. In 1971, Singapore's per capita GDP exceeded $1,000. The unemployment rate fell from 12% to 3%. Lee Kuan Yew once said a word to the people. I think it can speak to the hearts of today's young people. The government will give everyone a word job bowl, but if you break the job yourself, you can only be responsible for yourself. Third, what should I do if the faucet is in someone else's hand? So much for that. One song tells one thing for all Singaporeans: can't sleep. Water. Singapore is too small, no lakes. No big river, a lot of rainfall, but I couldn't catch it. All the rainwater goes into the sea and is gone. The local reservoir is full, it can't support 1/10 of the national dosage. When Singapore first gained independence, 95% of drinking water comes from Malaysia. 2 large water pipes cross the Johor Strait delivering water to Singapore every time. The relationship between Singapore and Malaysia is tense. Malaysian politicians will come out and shout, believe it or not, I turned off the faucet. 1998 financial crisis. NEWater let it go. Talk again in 2002. Every time Singapore shutters, one of the most developed countries in the world, throat pinched. Who lives these days? How did Singapore respond? Build an army to prepare for water grab. Many people don't know Singapore, this seemingly harmless garden city hidden the most capable army in Southeast Asia at independence in 1965. What is the total military strength of Singapore? 1,000 men couldn't make up a battalion 4 months later. An Israeli colonel, a military delegation led by Irazari, secret arrival in Singapore, helping Singapore build its army. Ministry of Defense build an intelligence system. Why Israel? Due to the situation in Singapore, just like Israel, a small place, the strong enemy is still for. 1967 Singapore passes legislation to implement compulsory military service. All 18-year-old men must serve for 2 years. Today, the Singapore regular army has more than 70,000 men. Once the reserves are mobilized, pull out 250,000 in 6 hours. Air Force equipment: F-15, F-16. The F-35 army has German-made explosive 2 tanks. A small country with an area of only 720 square kilometers, the proportion of military spending in GDP is above 3% all year round. First in Asia, and one of the core missions of this army hidden in the Ministry of Defense emergency plan. If Malaysia really cut off the water supply to Singapore, the Singapore Armed Forces will enter Johor, take over water pipelines and water sources by force. This is not a user's brain supplement. This is Lee Kuan Yew with his Ministry of Defense. Over the years, repeated brand warnings for Malaysia. Every time NEWater shouts to turn off the faucet, the Singaporean military is about to rehearse water source defense battle. Singapore's F-16 fighter jets take off from Changi 3 minutes over Johor. Got it? Singapore's water security goes beyond technology, also by loading bullets. This is a hard hand and soft. It's called the 4 taps national strategy. Lee Kuan Yew made a decision. It will take a generation to break this pipe. Singapore has launched it's called the 4 taps national strategy. First, give the land of Singapore 2/3 of the area is reduced to catchment. All the rainwater goes into the reservoir through ditches. A country, it's like a giant reservoir. The second, import of Malaysian water continues to be purchased, but it's going to go down. Third, seawater desalination. The first nitriding plant opened in 2005. By 2020. For nitriding plants can provide 30% of the country's water. Fourth, faucet. Singapore is the most proud and the most unheard of invention called NEWater. NEWater is used to remove wastewater from households and factories through reverse osmosis, membrane UV disinfection, ultrafiltration and other technologies processed into water that can be drunk directly. Yes. Drink the water in the sewer after it is treated. Singaporeans didn't accept it at first either. Psychologically difficult. What should I do? Lee Kuan Yew drinks it himself. All the ministers drink in front of the camera. Hold an international conference. Put foreign leaders in front of TV cameras. Drink together. Until today, NEWater meets 40% of Singapore's water use. Singapore has even embraced NEWater technologies. Made a door business. Sold to China, sold to the Middle East, sold to all countries with water shortages. The most amazing thing about Singapore is that he took every weakness that seemed fatal. It's become a business. A man pushed into a corner. The only thing to do is to tear down the wall. The fourth 60 years from $450 to $85,000. We fast forward in time. Independence in 1965. Singapore's GDP per capita is $450, $1,000 in 1971, $3,000 in 1978-1990. The year Lee Kuan Yew left office us $14,504. Singapore has crossed the threshold of developed countries this year. The GDP per capita of neighboring Malaysia is $2,283. Singapore is 5.5 times his size. Remember these two numbers. The two countries were 160 years ago. Enter the 21st century. Singapore completes an industrial upgrade every 10 years. The 1970s engaged in labor secrets, engaging in capital secrets. In the 1980s technical cheats. In the 1990s knowledge cheats. In the 2000s suppressing biomedicine and finance. In the 2010s Singapore's report card. By 2024 GDP per capita $85,000. Beyond Japan, beyond America, first in Asia. Total trade from $800 million in 1965 soaring to $235.8 billion. The top 10 most profitable drugs in the world. There are 4 models produced in Singapore family offices. 1,650. The world's richest people are moving their money into escrow. An island that was kicked out of the door become a transit point for the world processing plant R&D center. Blue water paradises. Fifth answer to the world. Talk about Singapore. Can't avoid China. Many people don't know Wu Qingrui, the chief architect of Singapore's economy. What did you do after retirement? He became an economic advisor to the State Council of China 1985 to 1990, helping China plan special economic zones. Shenzhen-Zhuhai Industrial Park. Planning for these early special zones in Xiamen. There are quite a few. The shadow of Singapore. Jade Wolf Industrial Park. Later Suzhou Industrial Park. It is simply a project cooperated by the center. Launched in 1994, today it is one of the most successful industrial parks in China. Urban planning in Singapore. ICAC model pollution control system. National Sovereign Fund. But MARCI and GSC all have been borrowed from systematic research in China. Remodeled. Lee Kuan Yew himself first visited China in 1976. Visited China more than 30 times before and after. Why? Because of what Singapore has done. Is one small country version of government-led plus open route. He proved one thing: government-led plus market economy plus opening to the outside world can create miracles. What is the most interesting part of the Singapore story? He told us an abnormal truth: the fate of nations is not so much about resources. Argentina, Venezuela, South Africa, etc. You see countries everywhere that have broken a good hand. What about Singapore? Nothing but people. His water comes from the toilet. He buys his food from neighboring countries. His territory is too small to be found on the map, but he has a clear national strategy. There is an elite group that does not fight infighting. There are leaders who don't mess around. There are citizens who believe in education, have the courage to integrate into the world. March 23, 2015. Lee Kuan Yew passed away. Singaporeans queue up spontaneously. The team stretched for several kilometers to send him on his last journey. A wife who was kicked out by her father. I ended up living as an Asian parent. A small island that is looked down upon by the world. In the end, let the world compete to bring the money. This is Singapore. 60 years to prove that weakness is not the end. Desperation is also a track. Subordinate trailer for the next episode. Let's talk about a better place than Singapore. More dangerous countries. Israel. May 14, 1948. Israel declares statehood. The next day, the armies of 5 Arab countries come in from all directions. A country just born 650,000 Jews. The opponent is 150 million Arab, but it is such a country fighting the battle into a sample in the land of 4 wars. In the Israeli-Arab war, win almost every game. Israel today, it is the first echelon of global military technology. It's the epicenter of the chip design world. Is the birthplace of drones. How'd he do it? What do you rely on? Advanced military industrial system. Who is behind the blood transfusion? The next episode of Israel's establishment in the land of 4 wars. What is the country considered by the Arab army? How to reverse the deadlock.